Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men who are the go-to parents aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, both online and in person. And the one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Now, today, my guest is Jaclyn Wong, an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and a faculty affiliate in the Women's and Gender Studies Department at the University of South Carolina. We're going to talk about her new book, Equal Partners: How Dual Professional Couples Make Career, Relationship, and Family Decisions. Welcome, Jaclyn, to the Company of Dads podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How did you begin studying this area? Long before you decided on the topic of your book, how did you come about studying the area that you study?
This project actually started with an observation that I made as I was graduating from college over 10 years ago. I noticed that some of the women who I was friends with who were graduating alongside me decided to move wherever their boyfriends had gotten jobs. Mm-hmm. The women themselves did not have jobs lined up for themselves, nor did they have social networks in those places, and they thought that they would figure it out when they got there. And to be honest, I was a little worried about them, right? I had another friend who was a man who made a different decision. So he broke up with his girlfriend at the time because her professional plans after graduation did not line up with his career plans, or so he told me. As I kept talking to him about it, I learned that he hadn't really explored or done any research on whether or not he would be able to launch his career in the city where she was going to start her career. And I was just really wondering if there were broader social forces playing a role in my friends' lives, because here I was about to go to graduate school for a PhD in sociology, being someone who's interested in gender inequality and issues of work and family. So I decided to more systematically explore these ideas rather than just observe my friends.
Sure. But it all starts with observation, so to pique your curiosity. Were they moving to obscure places, or were they moving to big cities like Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C.? Or
no, they were not big cities, right? So they were moving to places in like Indiana, places in Maryland, but not the DC area. And I'm from California. We were kind of West Coast based, and it just feels far, and not know anybody and not really know anything about the area that you're going to.
Sure, it also makes sense if you sort of, wherever you are in the United States or in the world, you plunk yourself down in New York City, chances are you'll find something. If you plunk yourself down somewhere else, there may be something, but it may not be the something that you really want to do. Well, and why do you think, did you ever delve in with this one guy who sort of went the other way and did do research? Did you ever, you were young, you're 22, you graduated from college, but did it ever, obviously that story stuck with you. What do you think it was about him that allowed him to make a different choice?
I definitely think that there are kind of different cultural pressures that men and women face when it comes to making trade-offs between your career and your relationship, where it might be a little bit more acceptable and maybe perhaps expected for women to prioritize their romantic relationships and, kind of families and partners a little more so than their careers. But for men, the expectation is to prioritize your career and not to kind of pursue a relationship if it is going to get in the way of your career. So that is my speculation around what I think was going on.
So, you finished college, you go right after graduate school. I finished college years and years before you, but went to the same exact graduate school, the University of Chicago, where fun goes to die. And it's a wonderful motto that they have. But you show up, and I know, from personal experience, a bit of a grind to get there. Everyone's really smart. They've done well other places, and you start taking your courses, but this idea sticks with you. Comes, time to sort of do, perhaps research for a master's thesis, perhaps you're thinking about your dissertation. When you start doing this research into what becomes, equal partners, what did you expect to find? Like, did you have a hypothesis as to what you expected to find versus, obviously the next question is going to be what you actually found, but what did you expect to find as you embarked on this research?
Yeah, when I started the research, it was actually for my master's thesis. And I thought that if it went well, then it could be the foundation for a dissertation. And, I feel really happy that it's now a book,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, I hypothesized that the kind of cohort of men and women that I was hoping to study would take more gender egalitarian pathways into work and family than their predecessors. So I was doing a lot of reading on what exists in the literature, and the kind of common refrain is that when there are two careers that couples are trying to negotiate and balance and navigate together, women kind of consistently pull back on their careers, and kind of allow men to pursue theirs 100%. And
Hmm.
I didn't think that that was what I was going to see in the group of young adults that I was hoping to study. So I purposefully tried to study people who were graduating from professional and graduate degree programs. So these are people who are going to be lawyers, they're going to be
Hmm.
doctors, they're getting their masters in public policy, hoping to work in government. So these
Yeah.
people are really invested in having a career. They potentially grew up following kind of second wave feminism, where many of these men and women's own mothers
Hmm.
worked and participated in the workforce. So it was not weird or strange that a woman might pursue a career and that men would be supportive of it. And so I was thinking that I would see some more gender equal couples. And I think I did see that, but I think I also found some things that were very surprising in my study.
Yeah, well, we're going to go into it, but it's interesting because, yeah, they've invested their time, they've invested money. Sometimes you get a stipend, or sometimes you get a fellowship for a program like this. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes if you're going to law school, it's, medical school. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. And so all the couples that you focused on were, is it fair to say, at the beginning of their careers, like in their 20s, and right. And so you're trying to, kind of almost like a fresh slate. They've been influenced there, and you picked 21 pairs, 21 couples. How did you select them? Because, I know how this sausage is made here, but maybe for the listener, you can't just pick, 21 of your best friends and call it a scientific study and go from there. You have to have it be representative. So talk through for the listener how you identified those 21 couples to have them be a representative sample for what you're hoping to learn.
Sure. So, in interview research, which is the type of research I did for this project, the aim is not necessarily to get representation insofar as equal proportions of, men and women in these different programs. It's more about representation of key characteristics of the people that you think are going to influence the pathways into their careers and their families. So let me kind of
Yeah.
break that
For
down a
example.
little bit more. Yeah, so I used a method called quota sampling, where I decided that in order to get a wide range of perspectives into my study, I need to make sure that I have representation of couples where both partners are graduating from their programs and immediately searching for jobs. I needed some couples where she was immediately graduating and immediately having to search for jobs. And he could be, a little further down the line, or maybe he is already a little bit established in his career. And then the other case would be couples in which he is graduating and making the immediate kind of career decision to launch his career. And again, she could be someone who's a couple years behind or someone who's already a little bit established in her career. So by getting variation across the gender of the job seeker in these couples, I could really see how different social forces might be playing a role in the way that these couples experience the transition from school to work, depending on whether the leader of the job search is a man or a woman, right? So the expectation would be, if gender is not playing a traditional role like we would expect, in couples where she's searching for a job, couples should follow her wherever she's going, right? And in couples where he's looking for a job, they're just going to go where he's going. And in couples where both people are looking for jobs, they're going to go together and, you know, try to find something together.
Yeah.
But if gender is still playing a role, then if she's searching for a job, she might give up that search because wherever she's going might not make sense for him, right? This is kind of echoing that pattern that I saw in my friend who was a man, right? And if gender is still playing a role, where men are the ones searching for jobs, she's going to follow no matter what, no matter the cost to her own career, right? And that's kind of echoing some of the things.
All right, it's killing us. I've had the book, but the listeners haven't. What do you find? What do you learn with these 21 couples?
So what I learned is that the gender of the job seeker didn't matter in the way that I expected. And this is how you know you're doing good research, right? Like, you're not just finding things that kind of confirm what your hypotheses are. But what I found was that couples followed 3 work family pathways, as I call them. So one pathway is the consistent compromiser pathway, where men's and women's careers are equally prioritized the entire time that they're in the study, and men's and women's responsibilities at home are also equally shared. Then I have a group called the tending traditional couples. Now, these are not gender traditional insofar as he works and she doesn't. It's just that his career is prioritized over hers. She still might work, but she kind of takes whatever she can get, and his career is kind of the star. And then there is a pathway called the autonomous actors pathway. And this is a group of men and women who kind of each individually did their own thing next to each other. So these couples kind of said, you should do what's best for you, and I should do what's best for me. And hopefully it will all work out for us. But, you know, that kind of creates some logistical burdens for somebody to take on.
I should have asked this earlier, but these 21 couples, they're couples, but were they necessarily married?
No, they were not.
They weren't. So were any of them married?
Yes, I again used my quota sampling and purposefully chose to talk to half married couples and half unmarried couples, because I had a suspicion that married couples might function a little differently than non-married couples.
Did that determine which of the 3 buckets that they fell into?
A little bit. So I don't know if determine is the right word, but there was an association between marital status and the work family pathways that they traveled. So the unmarried couples were much more likely to take the autonomous actors pathway, maybe not so surprising. But what was kind of interesting for me was that married couples were equally likely to be represented in the tending traditional couples pathway, as well as the consistent compromiser pathway. And this goes against previous literature, because marriage is supposedly this conservative institution with strong gender norms about what men and women should do as husbands and as wives. But for some of the couples, marriage really functioned as a promise to always prioritize both people's career pursuits, because that was what was important to each person, rather than say, we're now married, we have to be traditional.
Did you find, I know these are all folks who are starting their careers, coming out of professional schools, but did you find that if one of them, either the man or the woman, was a higher earner or was entering a profession where they're a higher earner. You talk about, a master's in public policy versus somebody who's an attorney. You could see there'd be a slight disparity in the beginning, growing into probably a large disparity depending what the attorney did with his or her law degree. Did that income have any impact on the decisions that people made?
So I purposefully chose to talk to people who were graduating from their programs and not in their careers yet, or like, so early on in their careers that, whatever their starting income was, maybe not super high. So income was not a factor that people said influenced their job decisions. There, I specifically tried to get couples where men and women had very similar earnings potential. So each
Okay.
person could be potentially earning a very high salary. And so those kinds of financial considerations are less likely to play a role. And then I could more directly examine how then gender might be playing a role. Because if she is getting, a PhD in chemical engineering and thinks that she's going to work in pharmacy and pharmaceuticals, and he has a similar type of degree, and those jobs are equally high paying, it's not really,
Yeah.
economically rational to say, well, we're going to prioritize his job or her job because both people are going to be earning quite a lot of money.
And since the approach you took, the method was this interview based approach. When you talk to people about this over the 6 years, if I got remember that correctly, that you're doing the research, and you pointed out to them, hey, you're an autonomous actor. Hey, you're consistently compromising. Hey, you're one of those couples that's tending to be more traditional. What was the reaction that people had when you pointed out essentially what bucket they were trending toward?
So I didn't ever tell people what pathway I thought that they were following because it
Mm.
was important for me as I was collecting data from them that they were able to tell their own stories
Right.
with their own viewpoints without any of my interpretation there. So, certainly as an analyst, I am doing some work and mapping out patterns, and charting people's trajectories. But I would never counter what people had to tell me, even if they contradicted themselves, which many of them did.
Right.
Um,
Okay, then let me ask a question a different way. If you had, say, married couples where, some were, trending traditional and some were the consistent, compromisers, what did you as the research say, here are some, trends here. The people in this group have told me they've made this decision for the following reasons, and the person and people in this group have made their decisions for these other reasons. What are some of those trends that you noticed?
Yes. So I use a framework that I invented called the Work Family Ecosystems Framework to analyze my data and to make sense of people's stories to put them onto a trajectory. The Work Family Ecosystems Framework says that it is the confluence of structural support, cultural support, and partners' effectively collaborative action that can produce egalitarian work family pathways.
Okay.
So, what I mean by that is for you to have structural support, you need to have a workplace that is family friendly,
Mm.
that offers resources to allow you to have an equal partnership with your partner. For us to have cultural support, we need to see people expressing attitudes about gender equality rather than gender traditional attitudes where, he is the earner and she is staying at home. And for coordinated action, what we need to see is that partners are working together to share their resources with one another and to kind of leverage any kind of advantages that they might have in their situation to enable their own partner to participate in the workforce and at home as an equal partner. So the thing here is it's that all three of those pieces need to come together, and that's incredibly difficult, right,
Sure.
in our current society. So what I did when I analyzed the data was for each couple, I looked at what are the levels of structural support that they had access to versus what kinds of barriers did they face, right? Did their workplaces say absolutely no working from home, right? Did their workplaces say, nope, we don't really have a parental leave policy, so why don't you take 5 days off and then come back next week, right? Like that, I had stories like that.
Yeah.
And then in terms of cultural support, I really had to rely on people's words and what they believed was right to do as men or what was right to do as women. And then in terms of looking at coordinated action, this is where my interviews with partners separately really paid off because sometimes one person would tell me one story and another person would tell me a very slightly different story. And that kind of mismatch would kind of alert me to, I don't know if they're on the same page. And I don't know if this person is really activating some of their resources for their partner. And now I've forgotten what your question was because I needed to explain that.
Trying to like kind of extrapolate out some trends here, but that's an interesting point there. Like when you found people weren't on the same page, did they fall into one of these three buckets, or could they have been in either of the three buckets and they really didn't want to be autonomous actors, or they really didn't want to be consistently compromising?
Yes. So the partners who were not on the same page with each other were much more likely to take the autonomous actor pathway. And the way that looked in practice was that men and women kind of endorsed this gender neutral version of egalitarianism, where they believe that men and women should be free to do what they individually want to do. So I'm not going to get in your way with whatever career or family pursuits you might have. Right? That sounds kind of perhaps egalitarian. It's certainly gender neutral, right? It's a standard that's applied to both men and women. But where gender came back in was in men's and women's patterns of interaction, where men would kind of passively state, you should do what you want to do. I'm going to do my own thing in the corner and stay out of your way. But women were much more proactive in saying, but if we want to do this together, these are the sorts of compromises that I'm willing to make. Like I can choose to leave my career, right? Like, it's a constrained choice. Yeah. But men and women are using this gender neutral logic to kind of paper over that they're not really working together. They're not really on the same page because women were working a lot harder to leverage what resources they could access from their workplaces to facilitate a dual career partnership. So it was women who were much more likely to look at family-friendly policies to try to keep the couple together and keep both people's careers, moving forward. And men, I don't think were being malicious at all, right? I think that they just believe that if I stay out of your way, it'll be fine, rather than how do I actively look for resources from my workplace to enable you to do what you want to do in your career. So they were a surprising bunch to me because the autonomous actors had the same level of structural support as the consistent compromisers. So they had equal access to workplace family-friendly policies. They had equal access to high incomes that could help them outsource, some domestic work and childcare. It's just that the men on the autonomous actors pathway never really thought to use it to benefit their partners and their families. Like they just didn't connect the dots. Again, it was not malicious. I think it was very unintentional that they weren't making the connection that if I use this resource that's available to me at work, I could benefit a lot of people. I could benefit my partner. I could benefit my family. I could benefit my kids.
It's really interesting because we talk at the Company Dads a lot. I use this analogy of resentment, and I say, resentment doesn't emerge, fully formed on your wedding day. I mean, obviously, you meet somebody, you love that person, you get married, maybe you choose to have children, and you build this life together. But resentment is more like, and this is, I think, an analogy everybody gets, those dust bunnies that build up under a couch in your house, and you only realize they're there when you move. You pick up the couch, you're like, holy cow, this is disgusting. How did this happen? I got to vacuum this up. And that's resentment. Resentment builds, gradually. So when you talk about these three different sort of buckets or archetypes, do you see that once people are in those modes, that it's harder for them to change, or the autonomous actors who are not married yet, or just a partner, maybe they break up with that person, they go separate ways, and in the future maybe they become a consistent compromise, or maybe they go more the traditional route. Do you have any indication as to, what might happen going forward?
Yes. So I do think that there is a bit of path dependence. So I capture these people right at this turning
Yeah.
point in their lives, right? They're graduating from school, they're trying to launch their careers, and I follow them for the first 5, 6 years of them trying to establish themselves professionally and as a family. Um, and I think that the patterns that they develop early on are easy to stick with, right? They become habits. And the kind of ecosystem that you find yourself in, right? What's my workplace context? Like, what are the cultural messages that are around me? Just kind of get reinforced over time as you stay in that spot that you're in. So I did see a little bit of change over time with the autonomous actors. They're kind of working next to each other independently, but over time they become more interdependent with each other. Um, some of the autonomous actor couples did break up, as you mentioned, and I think that there was some learning, right, where when they partnered with new people, they were much more explicit about how do we share a life together, because
Right.
what broke my previous partner up before was that we were just too autonomous from each other. um, so men in particular really changed their tune, and I was very surprised to be interviewing them, 5 years later, and they sounded like different people, where they said, well, I can't make decisions just for myself. I have to consider what will work for my wife. I need to pay attention to what I think is going to work for our kids. And so these transitions into marriage and these
There's
transitions.
hope. There's hope. I love a hopeful story.
Yeah, yeah. So that was also surprising because previous research indicates that the transition to parenthood promotes gender traditionalism, where we see men kind of leaning harder into work to kind of fulfill a breadwinner role, and women kind of drawing back from work so that they can meet their childcare responsibilities. But in my study, I noticed that parenthood sometimes allowed people kind of a second chance at really demonstrating and showing that I can be an equal partner and we can be equal partners and we can do this together. And so people really appreciated that, particularly the women on the tending traditional pathway. So the men and women who got themselves on the tending traditional pathway were not happy that that's where they were, because they
Mm.
started the study intending to be an equal dual career partnership. And they faced a series of work related challenges that made it very difficult for both people to have careers. And so they kind of said, well, for now, let's focus on getting his career established, and we'll get her started on her career later. And they found, of course,
Yeah,
that
it's hard to do.
it was
Hard to do.
hard, it was very hard to do. Um, but the transition to parenthood for these tending traditional couples provided men an opportunity to really be equal parents. And so, yes, he has, a demanding job, and he is kind of the financial rock of the family, but he is making such a concerted effort to come home in time for dinner every day. He is making a concerted effort to say on weekends, I am 100% in charge of childcare, because I know how hard it is for you to be with the kids 5 days a week while I'm gone. And so it was pretty interesting and surprising to see those kinds of patterns, because previous research would say then couples specialize, and she is 100% in charge of the kids and he is 100% invested in work, but not the couples in my study.
Right, right. This is great. And just a couple more questions. I'm really enjoying talking to you. Um, and before, I'll preface this by saying, when my first book came out, my first book was called Clutch, and the same week a book came out called Choke, and it turned out to be great because they both got reviewed together in the Wall Street Journal. But you have just released a book, Equal Partners, with a question mark and a couple months ago, another academic named Kate Mangino released a book called Equal Partners without a question mark. And I asked you this question, the subtitle of her book, and she was on the podcast a while ago, is Improving Gender Equality at Home. That's the goal. That's the subtitle of your book is, how dual professional couples make career, relationship, and family decisions. How do you see, like, when you see your book out there in the world, how do you see it affecting change? How do you see, what do you hope people will take away from it when they read it, or if other academics read it and incorporate some of your research into their classes? What impact do you hope that your book has?
Yeah, I really hope that the readers of my book will recognize that the issue of gender equality is not solely an individual problem to fix. As I mentioned to you with the work family ecosystems framework, it is the confluence of structural support, cultural support, and collaborative action across partners that can really get us to having equal partnerships. And I think that sometimes we see a lot of books that are very self-helpy, that say, what can you do to, balance work and family? What can you do, to facilitate gender equality in your relationship? But what my book is saying is that you can only do so much if you do not live in a society that has culturally supportive attitudes for egalitarianism and does not offer structural material support in terms of our workplaces and the availability of childcare and other kinds of policies that make it possible for people to really weave together work and family in a way that can be shared equally across all the people who are responsible for providing financial and direct care to our families. So I hope that people can see that, yeah, you do need to be coordinated in acting with your partner and collaborating together, but how can we then move beyond our couple and our relationship and our household to think of what's the kind of collective action that I need to be taking with my coworkers at work to lobby for the kinds of support that we need? How do I start talking to people in my community and planting these ideas that it is culturally acceptable for men and women to be equally involved at home and at work, and that it's actually quite beneficial for everyone, because families that have dual earner, dual caregiver models seem to be more resilient against these broader economic instabilities that we are continuing to see in our society, right? And families that are dual caregivers are more resilient against things like a sudden health shock among someone who might have been, responsible for running the household.
Sure. This is wonderful. Jaclyn Wong, assistant professor at the University of South Carolina and author of Equal Partners, How Dual Professional Couples Make Career, Relationship, and Family Decisions. Thank you so much for being on the Company of Dads podcast. One last question before I let you go. Off air, you said you have a partner, no kids yet. What are you? What are you guys? Are you consistent compromisers, autonomous actors, tending traditional? I have to ask the professor, how have you arranged your own life?
Yeah. Okay. So my partner knows everything about my research because he can't get away from me talking about it, right? And he tells me all the time that if he did not know about my research, he would have been an autonomous actor, thinking that if I just do my own thing in the corner and stay out of your way, everything is going to be great. But as he, heard me talk about my research, he realized, no, I need to actually be quite active in working with you to make sure that both of us are able to do the things that we want to do in our careers. So I think that we are quite consistent and compromising in our work and family lives. I still do think we kind of tend a little bit autonomous, but it is interesting that it has given us space to reflect on how we are and how we act with each other and what sorts of workplace resources and barriers we face that are different. Like, I'm a professor. I go to campus. I work, in person, and he works from home 100%. So this is like a scenario that we think about a lot, where he has quite a lot of workplace flexibility. And I'm flexible as a professor to some extent, right? Over the summers, maybe. But during the semester, I teach until this time. I cannot be home to cook dinner. So you're on dinner duty.
You get this guy signed up. He sounds like a perfect lead dad for the company of dads.
I'll let him know.
All right, Professor, thank you again. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer. Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media. Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition. Emily Servin, who is our web maestro. And of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.